Let's just jump right into this explainer, and to do that, I want you to imagine a specific date in the near future, July 4th, 2026. Picture a system that projects absolute unbreakable power, a leader standing at the forefront, vowing to take more territory, holding a 90-minute phone call with the President of the United States. On the outside, it looks like a man in total command of a global superpower. But if you look a little closer, under the surface, this entire system is haunted by unconfirmed signs of his physical decline. We're talking about a swollen face at a wreath-laying ceremony, slurred speech, maybe a sudden stumble while getting out of a car.
And that right there brings us to the core, really dramatic question at the heart of this entire system. What actually happens to Russia the day this man can no longer answer for himself? We've all heard the rumors circulating for months, right? But honestly, the truly terrifying part isn't all the speculation about his health. It's the glaring, absolute lack of an emergency exit if those rumors suddenly become reality. There is simply no backup plan.
The paper-thin legal reality holding this massive country together is just, well, it's astonishing. Article 92 of the Russian Constitution states, and I quote, "If the president is unable to fulfill his duties, the prime minister becomes acting president. An election must be held within 3 months." And that is literally all it says. Sure, it gives the acting president 3 months, but here's the catch. It expressly denies them the power to dissolve parliament, call a referendum, or change the constitution.
So the really crucial point here is what isn't written down in the law. Ask yourself, who officially determines incapacitation? I mean, who actually gets to make that incredibly consequential call? And even worse, what happens if both the president and the prime minister are gone at the exact same time? It's kind of wild to think about, but 26 years into this tightly controlled system, these massive system-breaking constitutional loopholes have just never been addressed.
This total ambiguity, it's building into a massive impending crisis. Let's take a look at the factions currently positioning themselves in the shadows. First, you have the security men. This features guys like Alexei Dumin, the former personal bodyguard and current state council secretary, alongside Dmitry Patrushev. Then you've got the technocrats, people like Sergei Kirienko and the guy who's legally first in line, Prime Minister Mishustin. And finally, the family, Alina Kabea and the president's daughters. The crazy thing is, there is absolutely no anointed successor waiting in the wings here. It's just competing power blocks staring each other down.
Nobody has been chosen. Everybody is just positioning. And the immediate stakes here are incredibly high. You have Dumin, who acts as the widely seen frontrunner, but he doesn't have an official mandate. Then you have Mishustin, who, like we said, is legally first in line, but on his own, he's almost entirely powerless. And then there's the family, stepping into these increasingly public roles with literally zero formal political standing. It's a full roster of players, but absolutely no heir.
$60 billion. That is a staggering number. That's the amount of assets quietly seized from business people and redistributed over just the past 3 years. Why do that? Well, it's to create a brand new, highly loyal, and heavily dependent tier of administrators. Basically, the state has spent a quarter of a century deliberately turning the country's elite into very capable managers who are, by design, fundamentally incapable of independent political judgment. They've been bought, and they are heavily managed.
Which makes this next sudden shift so incredibly stark. Public approval is sliding, and sharply, dropping from nearly 78% down to under 66% in a single year. But here's the trap. The Kremlin elite cannot simply step in and remove a faltering leader without completely destroying the very system that grants them all their wealth and protection. They are entirely dependent on the man at the top, even as public support for that man is starting to fracture. It's an elite class that literally cannot save itself.
So you might be wondering, when does this pressure cooker actually get tested? Let's trace the timeline. The last major cabinet reshuffle was in 2024, which, not coincidentally, is exactly when today's frontrunner got his current promotion. Now, you might want to circle September 20th, 2026 on your calendar. That's the State Duma elections. Now, we shouldn't view this as a truly competitive vote. Instead, think of it as a critical legitimacy ritual that guarantees an uncontested supermajority. And historically, major Kremlin elections are almost always followed by massive power shifts in the cabinet. So late 2026 is that next window where the succession trap might violently snap shut.
But here's the thing. We don't actually have to wait until late 2026 to see what this kind of chaos looks like. Because a live, real-time crisis is playing out right now, just one level down. A dress rehearsal, if you will, is happening in Grozny, Chechnya. The region's ruler, Ramzan Kadyrov, who's held absolute power there for nearly 20 years, is reportedly suffering from kidney failure. He's been in and out of the hospital, seen walking with a cane, the cracks are showing visibly, and it perfectly mirrors the health rumors swirling around Moscow.
You can see exactly how a succession plan completely falls apart when it's built entirely around one single man. Step 1. The leader's health fails visibly. Step 2. In an absolute panic to preserve the family's grip on power, Kadyrov rushes his teenage sons into official roles. But here is the fatal flaw. Step 3. Chechen law strictly requires the top leader to be at least 30 years old. His chosen heir won't even be legally eligible until 2037. Because of this massive gap, rival lieutenants are already circling the wagons.
And that brings us to the brutal reality of the Chechen situation. The final decision of who takes over doesn't actually rest with Grozny. It rests with Moscow. It's a perfect, real-time preview of a chaotic leadership vacuum. But man, it begs an incredibly dark question for the entire nation. What happens when the ultimate power broker, Moscow itself, is the one experiencing the vacuum? There won't be a higher authority to step in and stop the bleeding.
To truly wrap our heads around how unprecedented this is, we have to look back. Compare this current void to Russia's past transitions. In 1953, Stalin's sudden death left absolutely no safety net, and it resulted in 2 bloody years of purges and executed rivals. Fast forward to 1999, Boris Yeltsin managed a quiet, orchestrated handover. Why? Because he had a pre-tested successor installed before he resigned. Now, look at 2030. We're looking at a leader who will be 73 years old, with absolutely no collective governing body to absorb the shock and deliberately no heir waiting in the wings.
It is a state built to ensure that no one is ready to replace him. And this brings us to the ultimate paradox of absolute power. Russia has spent a quarter of a century deliberately dismantling its own emergency exits. So what happens to a nation when the smoke inevitably starts to fill the room, and everyone looks around and realizes the doors have been bricked over? What happens to a global superpower when it has absolutely no plan B?